All right, since we're doing an engine swap and the exhaust side might be over here on the passenger side, I'm gonna take this battery tray out. So in order to get this out, all I need to do is drill out these spot welds that are holding it in. Looks like there's maybe 10 or so spot welds around here, on this flange, and then on this side. To get a better picture of exactly where the spot welds are, I'm using a wire brush to clean up these flanges and reveal the spot welds. Now you can clearly see these spot welds. Some are shining right through, so I just gotta fully drill those out. There are special drill bits you can use for this to try to preserve the bottom layer of metal. But I'm just using a normal drill bit, which means I pretty much have to drill all the way through both pieces of metal. After I get this out, I'll essentially do a plug weld to fill in these holes. Now I use a punch to pry the battery tray's metal away and break off any remaining part of the weld. Some of them I had to bore the hole out a little more until it released. The bigger the hole left over, the more welding you'll have to do. This took a lot of iteration of drilling the holes larger and using the punch, working on each flange at a time. One of them was really stubborn, so I had to bring out the sawzall and cut the metal loose. It's out, and what we're left with is a bunch of holes to fill. But lucky for me, the rust underneath here isn't bad at all. A lot of Datsuns are in rough shape right here. Now we got this hideous mess that we have to clean up. Luckily, I just bought this MIG welder. I got it used actually, and it's a Harbor Freight, so it was a little bit of a gamble, but I got a really good price on it. So what we're gonna do is similar to a plug weld. So I'm gonna put a copper plate on the back of it and just fill in that hole with the welder and then grind it flat. But before we get to welding, we have to prep the material. There's some rust on this side, and then on the back side, we obviously have undercoat. So let's get to it. So I got a lot of wire wheels over here, both for a drill and an angle grinder. I've got the copper backing plates for when I'm welding, and of course the right PPE. Everything for welding, and then a mask for while I'm grinding off this rust and the undercoat. But for the abrasion part right now, I'm just gonna wear this because it is just too dang hot. I'm gonna risk having one of these metal brushes going into my leg, but we'll see how it goes. Eye protection is a must though. An angle grinder makes faster work of pretty much everything, but the drill is easier to get in these tight spaces and it's much quieter. This drill attachment was probably one of my favorites. I'll put a link in the description. It allows me to put a little more force onto it, and it's easier to control than the other wire brush. Can you see this hole here that goes through the firewall? There is a lining on the inside of the firewall for NVH, and definitely want to take that out. Otherwise, we'll possibly get some welding spatter that goes in there and starts a fire. So let's take that out. This is a cool little contraption you can get off of Amazon. So you got two strong magnets here, and then you got a little metal bend here with sheet metal, and that will hold it down. The weld won't stick to the copper, but it'll fill in that hole. And I'll weld from underneath, so that way I'm more likely to get a smooth surface on this side. I'm starting with this hole because this one will probably be the hardest to be seen. That way I can dial my welder settings in, and then the rest of them will hopefully look a little better. Here's the practice welds. These two were drilled holes through the sheet metal. This steel's a little bit thicker than what's in the car, so that's why I'll probably have to dial it back a little bit. But this is the back side, and this is the front. The back side's not completely filled out, but it's pretty darn good. Now I clean the paint off of this little metal thing on my engine bay from my grounding clamp. I'm new to welding, so definitely recommend watching some videos of some professionals and also practicing to get a feel for it. Knowing how to adjust the settings is key, especially for thin sheet metal. For instance, for this Harbor Freight welder, there's a recommended wire speed for this thickness of sheet metal, but I had to turn the settings up a decent amount higher. These settings are definitely hotter than what it recommends for the sheet metal, but that seems to be a pretty common thing when you're doing spot welds like this. Temperature and blow through is a huge concern when welding sheet metal. I only do extremely short bursts, maybe slightly more than you would for a tack weld, and give the panel plenty of time in between welds to cool down. For every weld, I'm cutting the end of the welding wire off to get those bubbles off and get fresh metal. The welds early on were running way cold, so I bumped up the wire speed to give me some more power. You can see how hideous these first welds were, and they're just balling up, especially compared to these ones I did later on that laid on a lot more flat. Here's the four I just did. As you can see, these are laying way more flat than these other ones when I was running a little cold. And the way I was welding these larger ones was just running small weld pools and then letting the metal cool off. So here you can see kind of like 4 different weld pools that I ran, and it filled up. Definitely not a pro, but I got 2 solid welds on both sides. So now I'm just gonna run a bead down the middle. This copper backing plate is good, but it's a little fiddly. I spent a ton of time arranging it, and I think the downward pressure on the copper is too much. So I bent the arm back a little bit so it'd be a little more relaxed. I use a light on the backside to check for pinholes and then fill those up. The angle grinder with the flap disc did wonders on smoothing the metal on the battery tray side. In the fender area where there's giant globs of metal from me welding, I used a grinding wheel just to knock them down. So that's it. Thanks for watching, y'all. I will eventually repaint the engine bay and put more undercoating in those wheel wells. But for now, I'm going to leave this as is because I have more work to do. But thanks for watching, y'all, and don't forget to subscribe to follow along with this build.